Emily sat on the edge of her bed, her gaze fixed on the peeling paint of the ceiling in her cramped apartment. The small space was a far cry from the life she had always envisioned for herself. The faint sound of traffic outside mixed with the low hum of her laptop, which was still open to her latest assignment, a paper on economic disparity. It felt ironic, given her own situation, as she scrolled through the pages of her research. She was a bright, ambitious college student, yet here she was, buried under a mountain of debt and uncertainty. With a sigh, she leaned back against the wall, the mattress creaking beneath her. The room was cluttered with textbooks, half-empty coffee cups, and clothes strewn about haphazardly. Among the chaos, a small framed photo of her family caught her eye. They smiled back at her, blissfully unaware of the struggles she faced. "I just need a break," she muttered to herself, rubbing her temples in frustration. It was then that her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from Mia, her best friend, popped up on the screen. "Did you hear about Harold, the old guy next door? He's loaded." Emily's curiosity piqued, and she quickly typed back, "What do you mean?" Mia replied almost instantly, "His wife passed away last month. They say he's got a huge life insurance policy. You should totally talk to him." Emily felt a twinge of excitement mixed with apprehension. Harold, the elderly widower who lived in the luxurious penthouse above her, had always been polite but distant. He was a man shaped by years of experience, with silver hair that contrasted sharply against his tanned, weathered skin. She had seen him at the community events, surrounded by people who seemed entranced by his stories. But Emily had always kept her distance, feeling out of place in his world of wealth and privilege. As she pondered Mia's suggestion, a plan began to form in her mind. Perhaps, she thought, this could be her opportunity to secure a better future. Harold's wealth could be the ticket out of her financial woes. However, even as the thought crossed her mind, a nagging voice in the back of her head warned her about the implications of such a decision. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the city, Emily decided to attend the community event at the local park. It was a gathering meant to celebrate the life of Harold's late wife, and Emily felt drawn to the idea of meeting him in person. Dressed in her best outfit, a simple but elegant blue dress, she smoothed her hair and took a deep breath. When she arrived at the park, the air buzzed with laughter and chatter. Families gathered around picnic tables, and children played on the grass, their giggles echoing in the evening air. Emily spotted Harold standing under a large oak tree, a small group of people surrounding him. He was animated, his hands gesturing as he recounted a story from his youth. With a mixture of determination and nerves, Emily approached. The laughter of the group faded as they noticed her, but Harold's warm smile welcomed her. "Ah, Emily, come join us. I was just telling them about the time I worked as a sailor in the Mediterranean." "Sounds fascinating," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. As Harold spoke, Emily found herself captivated not just by his stories, but by the way he carried himself, confident yet humble. He spoke of adventures, love, and loss, weaving a rich tapestry of experiences that seemed to draw everyone in. His eyes sparkled with life, and Emily couldn't help but feel an attraction to him, despite the age difference that loomed large in her mind. After the crowd began to disperse, Emily lingered, hoping for a moment alone with Harold. When the last stragglers had left, she took a step closer. "Mr. Harold, may I ask you some questions about your travels? I'm studying history, and your experiences sound so intriguing." He chuckled softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Of course, Emily. Call me Harold. I've had my share of adventures, and I'd be delighted to share them with you." As they talked, the world around them faded. Emily learned about his voyages, the cultures he had encountered, and the lessons he had gleaned from a life well lived. Each story seemed to resonate deeply with her aspirations, igniting a flicker of hope for a future beyond her current struggles. But as the conversation flowed, so did her thoughts about the practical side of their interaction. "Harold," she ventured cautiously, "what do you think about life insurance? I mean, it's a topic that's always seemed so grim to me, but it's also kind of a safety net, isn't it?" He tilted his head, intrigued. "Ah, life insurance. A necessary evil, some might say. It provides a cushion for those left behind. But I believe that true wealth lies in the moments we create, not merely in monetary terms. Emily felt a pang of guilt at her underlying motives. She smiled, masking the conflict brewing within her. That's a beautiful sentiment. After an hour of conversation, Harold's gaze softened. You have an old soul, Emily. It's refreshing to meet someone who appreciates life's nuances. As they exchanged goodbyes, Emily's heart raced with possibilities. She walked home, contemplating what had just transpired. She could feel the allure of Harold's wealth and wisdom, but the emotional connection they had forged felt real. Could it be that she was beginning to care for him, beyond the safety net of his financial status? The next day, she met Mia at their favorite cafe. The aroma of fresh coffee enveloped them as they settled into a booth, the chatter of other patrons creating a cozy atmosphere. Mia, always perceptive, leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. So, how did it go with Harold? Are you going to go for it? Emily took a sip of her latte, hesitating before answering. It was enlightening. He's a fascinating man, Mia. But I don't know. I'm still thinking about how to secure my future. Mia raised an eyebrow, concern etched on her face. Just be careful, Em. There's a fine line between being practical and exploiting someone's vulnerability. You don't want to lose yourself in this. I know, Emily replied, her heart heavy with the weight of her friend's words. But it's not just about the money. There's something about him that draws me in. Mia sighed, leaning back in her seat. Just promise me you won't lose sight of who you are in the process. You're more than your circumstances. Emily nodded, but in her heart, she felt the thrill of possibility mixed with the fear of the unknown. As they chatted and laughed, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The allure of Harold's world beckoned to her, but so did the voice of her conscience, reminding her of the complexities that lay ahead. That evening, as Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she felt torn between two worlds, the mundane struggles of her life and the enticing promise of something more. Little did she know, the choices she was about to make would lead her down a path filled with unexpected twists and revelations that would challenge her understanding of love, ambition, and her own moral compass. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the city, Emily found herself seated on Harold's sprawling terrace. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby oak tree, and the distant hum of traffic faded into a soft backdrop. She looked across the table at Harold, who was animatedly sharing a story from his youth, his blue eyes sparkling with nostalgia. Ah, those were the days, my dear, he chuckled, his voice rich and warm. I remember the summer of 1968 like it was yesterday. We had a small sailboat, and every weekend we would venture out into the bay. I took my first love out there, and we ended up getting stuck in a storm. Emily laughed, captivated by the way he painted the picture with his words. What happened? She asked, leaning forward, her curiosity piqued. Harold leaned back in his chair, a mischievous grin creeping across his face. Let's just say, we learned to navigate by the stars that night and came back soaked but victorious. It was an adventure I wouldn't trade for anything. She admired the gleam in his eyes, the way he transported her to another time, another place. Emily had entered this arrangement with a clear goal in mind, yet as the days turned into weeks, her feelings for Harold began to complicate. They shared laughter that echoed through the air, and moments of silence that felt comfortable, not awkward. Do you miss those days? She asked softly, sensing a hint of longing in his tone. Oh, terribly. But I've made peace with it, he replied, his expression shifting to a more reflective one. Life has a way of moving on, doesn't it? You lose people, but you gain memories, and those are precious in their own right. Emily nodded, feeling a pang of empathy. She had known loss, too. The death of her father when she was just a child had left an indelible mark on her heart. I understand, she said gently. I lost my dad a long time ago. Sometimes it feels like I'm just holding on to the memories. Memories can be both a blessing and a curse, Harold mused, his gaze drifting to the city skyline. They can lift you up, but they can also drag you down if you let them. A silence settled between them, comfortable yet heavy with unspoken thoughts. Emily glanced at the half-empty wine bottle on the table, a remnant of their earlier celebration. You know, I never imagined I'd be here, sitting with someone like you, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Harold turned to her, his expression softening. Someone like me? What do you mean? Someone who's lived so much, who has such fascinating stories, she explained, her cheeks flushing. I mean, I came into this thinking it would be transactional, but it's so much more than that now. He studied her for a moment, the corners of his mouth lifting in a gentle smile. You have a kind heart, Emily. It's easy to see that. But I hope you know that this is not just a game for me. I've been lonely since my wife passed. You've brought light into my life, and for that, I'm grateful. The sincerity in his voice struck a chord within her. Guilt gnawed at her, slowly creeping in like an unwelcome visitor. Emily had initially seen this as a means to an end, yet here she was, forming a genuine bond with a man far older than her. Later that evening, as they transitioned from light-hearted banter to deeper conversations, Harold opened up about his struggles with loneliness. You know, Emily, it's strange how one can feel so isolated in a crowded room. Since Claire passed, there have been countless gatherings, but I often feel like a ghost among the living. Emily leaned closer, her heart aching for him. You're not a ghost to me, she said quietly. You're real, and you matter. I can see that you've experienced so much. It's inspiring. Thank you, Harold replied, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. But it's hard to shake off the loneliness. I suppose that's why I find our time together so refreshing. You bring a spark with you. A warmth spread through her chest, and she felt the weight of her initial intentions shifting. As the days turned into weeks, her feelings became muddied, tangled in a web of affection and ambition. The following weekend, Harold invited her to a family gathering. It's just a small get-together, he assured her. Some cousins, a few close friends. I'd love for you to meet them. Emily hesitated. The thought of meeting his family sent a jolt of anxiety through her. What will they think of us? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Oh, I wouldn't worry too much about that. They are good people, but they might be surprised, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck thoughtfully. I would like to introduce you as my girlfriend, if you're comfortable with that. The word girlfriend hung in the air, heavy with implications. Emily felt a rush of warmth, but also a pang of dread. What if they don't understand? She questioned, her mind racing. Let them judge. What matters is how we feel about each other, he replied, his voice firm yet gentle. I want them to see the woman who has brought joy back into my life. As the day of the gathering approached, Emily tried to prepare herself mentally. She dressed carefully, choosing a light blue dress that emphasized her youthful appearance while also exuding a sense of maturity. When she arrived at Harold's house, the warmth of the setting sun cast a golden glow over the gathering, a stark contrast to the coolness she felt in her stomach. Harold greeted her at the door, his eyes lighting up as he took her hand. You look stunning, he said, squeezing her hand gently. Thank you, she replied, feeling a flutter of nerves. Are you ready for this? Ready as I'll ever be, he said, turning serious for a moment. Just remember, they're family. They'll love you the moment they see how happy you make me. As they entered the crowded living room, Emily felt like an outsider. Laughter and chatter filled the air, and she could see Harold's cousins mingling with their partners, children darting between legs. When Harold finally introduced her, she felt the room quiet momentarily, all eyes turning to her. Everyone, this is Emily, he announced with a proud smile. My girlfriend! The reactions were immediate. Some faces lit up with curiosity, while others wore expressions of skepticism. A tall woman with auburn hair raised an eyebrow. Girlfriend? Harold, she looks so young. I'm 20, actually, Emily interjected, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. 20? And you're dating my cousin? A younger man chuckled, crossing his arms. What's the appeal? His stories? Actually, yes, Emily replied, forcing a smile. His stories are quite fascinating. Harold stepped in, his tone protective yet lighthearted. Now, let's not be rude. Emily is a remarkable young woman, and I'm grateful to have her in my life. She brings a vibrancy that I didn't know I was missing. The atmosphere shifted slightly as Harold's words resonated with some of the guests. Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her, but the skepticism still lingered in the air. She could feel the weight of judgment weighing down on her, making her heart race. "I just hope you know what you're getting into," one of Harold's cousins said, her tone more serious now. "There's a lot of history here." "I do," Emily replied, her voice firm. "I understand the complexities that come with this relationship, but I also know how much I care about Harold." As the evening wore on, Emily found herself engrossed in conversations, slowly melting the initial tension. Harold's family began to warm up to her, their questions becoming more genuine, their laughter more shared. Yet deep down, she could still feel the skeptical glares, reminding her of the precariousness of her situation. In that moment, amidst the laughter and warmth, Emily realized that she was no longer just after Harold's wealth. The bond they had formed was real, and despite the judgment from others, she was determined to stand by his side. She had stumbled into a whirlwind of emotions, and whether it was right or wrong, she was ready to embrace it. Emily stepped into Harold's expansive study, her breath catching at the sight before her. The room was a treasure trove, filled with art pieces that spanned centuries and antiques that whispered stories of a time long gone. Each item seemed to pulse with history, their beauty undeniable. She had been to the study several times before, but today felt different. As she wandered through the maze of paintings and sculptures, her mind raced with thoughts of her original intentions. Harold had invited her to this sanctuary to share a glass of wine and discuss art, a passion they had both discovered during their time together. But as she traced her fingers delicately over the ornate frame of a gilded mirror, guilt washed over her like a tide. Was she really here? For the love of art? Or was she simply a moth drawn to the flame of his wealth? "Emily?" Harold's voice broke through her reverie. He stood at the doorway, a glass of Merlot in one hand and a warm smile on his face. "What do you think? Isn't it magnificent?" "It's incredible," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You have such a unique collection." He walked over to her, his presence comforting and warm. "Each piece has a story. This mirror, for example, belonged to a famous French novelist. Can you imagine the reflections it has seen?" She nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. The mirror reflected not just their surroundings, but also the choices Emily had made. Harold's wealth had initially been a draw, a means to an end in her mind. But the more time she spent with him, the more she realized that the connection they shared had begun to transcend her original intentions. "Are you all right?" Harold asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "You seem a bit distant." Emily took a deep breath, determined to shake off the confusion swirling in her mind. "I'm fine, just thinking about how much these pieces mean to you." "Art is a reflection of life," he explained, leaning against the doorframe. "It captures moments, emotions, and memories. Just like our experiences, it shapes who we are." She looked up at him, his eyes a deep well of wisdom and experience. "I guess I've never thought about it that way," she admitted. "I've always seen art as something beautiful, but never as a narrative of someone's life." "Then let me show you," he said, stepping into the room and gesturing for her to join him. "This painting here, it was created during a time of great turmoil. The artist poured his heart into it, and that emotion resonates through every brushstroke." As he spoke, Emily's heart raced. She felt a pang of guilt for her earlier thoughts. Harold wasn't just a wealthy man. He was a person filled with depth and emotion. The more she learned about him, the more she realized how much she had underestimated their relationship. "Harold, can I ask you something?" she said, hesitating slightly. "Of course, Emily. You can ask me anything. Do you ever worry about what happens next?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. He paused, the warmth in his eyes dimming slightly. "You mean with my estate?" Emily nodded, her stomach twisting. "I know it's a bit personal, but it's hard not to think about it when we're together. I mean, you've built so much. What will happen to it all?" Harold looked thoughtful, a shadow of sadness crossing his face. "I've worked hard for what I have, but it's not just about the possessions. It's about legacy, what I leave behind in the hearts of those I love." His words struck her like a bolt of lightning, igniting a sense of urgency within her. She had been so focused on the material aspects of their relationship that she had failed to consider the emotional implications. "Harold," she began, her heart racing. "I—" Before she could finish, the sharp ring of Harold's phone interrupted them. He excused himself and stepped out of the room, leaving Emily to wrestle with her thoughts. She paced the study, her fingers brushing against the art as she replayed their conversation in her mind. When Harold returned, his face was pale, a stark contrast to the vibrancy of the room. "Everything okay?" she asked, concern flooding her voice. He nodded slowly, but Emily could see the tension in his shoulders. "It was just a call from my financial advisor. We were discussing some plans regarding my estate." "Estate?" she repeated, her heart racing again. "What kind of plans?" "Just standard stuff," he replied, but Emily could see the unease in his eyes. Life insurance policies, investments, that sort of thing. The mention of life insurance sent a rush of adrenaline through her. Suddenly, her original intentions came rushing back to the forefront of her mind. She was torn between the man standing before her and the financial security she had once sought. "Harold," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "do you think about who you want to inherit everything?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I've thought about it, yes. I have children, after all. They will be my heirs." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had hoped there might be a chance for her to be part of that legacy, a place in his life that extended beyond their relationship. "And what about me?" she blurted out, the words escaping before she could rein them back in. "Emily," he started, stepping closer, his tone gentle yet firm, "our relationship is still new. I care for you deeply, but I have responsibilities to my family. They come first." The truth felt like a slap, and Emily took a step back, grappling with the weight of his words. "I understand," she said, her heart sinking. "But what if it's more than that?" "More than what?" Harold asked, his brow furrowing. "More than just a relationship based on companionship," she replied, her voice steadier now. "What if there's a future for us that includes financial security?" "Emily," he said softly, "this isn't just about money for me. I want to be with you because of who you are. I want to share my life with you, not just my wealth." His sincerity tugged at her heartstrings, but the nagging thoughts of her original motivations loomed over her like a dark cloud. She felt trapped between the man she was beginning to love and the practicalities that had initially driven her to him. "Maybe we need to talk about this more," she suggested, striving for clarity. "I need to know what you want and what this means for us." "Let's take it one step at a time," he replied, his voice calming. "I want you in my life, Emily. That's what matters right now." As they stood there, the weight of uncertainty hung in the air like a delicate balance. Emily's heart ached with the realization that her feelings for Harold were becoming more complex than she had ever anticipated. She had entered this relationship with a clear goal in mind, but now the lines had blurred, and she found herself questioning everything. "Okay," she whispered, feeling a mixture of hope and fear. "Let's see where this journey takes us." In that moment, Emily recognized that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Yet the possibility of love, real love, was a path she was willing to explore, even if it meant confronting her own motivations along the way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the room, Emily stood by the window, her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Harold had surprised her with a romantic getaway to a quaint seaside cottage, a place where the sound of waves crashing against the shore was said to soothe the soul. The invitation had been unexpected, yet she couldn't deny the thrill that coursed through her veins at the thought of spending uninterrupted time with him. "Are you ready to go, my dear?" Harold's voice floated through the air, warm and inviting, pulling her from her thoughts. He was dressed sharply in a light linen shirt and tailored trousers, looking every bit the charming gentleman she had come to admire. His silver hair glimmered in the fading light, and for a moment, Emily felt a pang of affection as she took in the sight of him. "Just about," she called back, glancing at her reflection. The dress she had chosen was simple, yet elegant, a soft blue that complemented her fair complexion. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the weekend ahead. It was supposed to be a romantic escape, but with every passing moment, she felt the weight of her initial intentions pressing down on her. As they drove along the coast, the rhythmic sound of the tires on the pavement matched the rapid beating of Emily's heart. The windows were rolled down, and the salty breeze danced through her hair, carrying with it the scent of the ocean. Harold spoke animatedly about the history of the area, sharing stories from his youth that painted vivid pictures in her mind. Emily found herself hanging onto his every word, captivated not just by the tales, but by the man himself. "Do you see that?" Harold pointed towards a small cove nestled between two cliffs. "That's where I used to spend my summers as a boy. My parents had a small boat, and we would sail out there for hours." "It sounds beautiful," Emily replied, allowing herself to imagine the laughter of a younger Harold, carefree and full of life. The image tugged at her heart, reminding her that beneath the wealth and the years was a man who had lived a rich and varied life. They arrived at the cottage, a charming structure with whitewashed walls and a rustic wooden deck overlooking the beach. Harold opened the door for her, and as she stepped inside, she was enveloped by the enticing aroma of fresh flowers and the briny tang of the sea. The interior was cozy, filled with vintage furniture and personal touches that hinted at Harold's life and experiences. "Welcome to our little escape," he said, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. "I hope you'll find it as peaceful as I do." As they settled in, Harold poured them both a glass of wine. "To new adventures," he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. Emily smiled, but her heart raced as she reflected on what this weekend might mean for them. The evening unfolded with laughter and shared stories, their connection deepening as they discovered more about each other. They walked along the beach, the soft sand beneath their feet, and watched the sun sink into the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Emily's worries began to drift away with the tide, replaced by a growing affection she hadn't anticipated. "Emily," Harold said, breaking the comfortable silence between them as they sat on a weathered log, the sound of waves lapping at the shore. "I want you to know how much you mean to me. These past few months have brought me so much joy." Her heart swelled at his words. "I feel the same way, Harold. I didn't expect to connect with you like this." He turned to her, his expression earnest. "I've spent too long in the shadow of my late wife. You've brought light back into my life." The air between them felt charged, and Emily's stomach fluttered as she met his gaze. "I'm glad I could help you feel that way," she said softly, the truth of her feelings spilling from her heart. As the stars began to twinkle above, Harold leaned closer, his breath warm against her skin. "May I?" he asked, his voice low and inviting. "Yes," she whispered. And in that moment, the world around them faded away. Their lips met in a tender kiss, soft and hesitant at first, but quickly deepening into something more passionate. Emily felt a whirlwind of emotions, desire, warmth, and an undeniable connection that made her question everything she had planned. As they pulled apart, Harold rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he confessed, his eyes searching hers for any sign of regret. "Me too," Emily admitted, her heart racing. "But I need to be honest with you." "What is it, my dear?" he asked, concern etching his features. "I came into this relationship with intentions that were not entirely pure," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought about your wealth and security, and I'm afraid I've lost sight of what truly matters." Harold's expression softened, and he brushed a stray hair from her face. "I appreciate your honesty, Emily. But what I feel for you is real. I can't deny that I've been lonely, and you've filled that void in my life." The weight of his words settled heavily in the air between them. Emily felt the guilt creeping back, but it was accompanied by a burgeoning realization that her feelings for Harold were evolving into something genuine. "I didn't expect to care for you like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I do." "Then let's not complicate things," Harold suggested, a gentle smile breaking through the tension. "Let's enjoy this weekend and see where it takes us. No expectations." Emily nodded, relief washing over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt free to explore the depths of her emotions without the burden of her original intentions weighing her down. As they returned to the cottage, the atmosphere was charged with a new sense of possibility. They shared dinner by candlelight, the flickering flames casting soft shadows on the walls. Harold opened up about his late wife, telling stories that were filled with love and loss, while Emily shared her dreams, her hopes, and the struggles she faced as a college student. Hours melted away, and soon they found themselves wrapped in each other's arms on the couch, the warmth of their bodies creating a cocoon of intimacy. Emily's mind raced with the implications of their newfound connection. How could she reconcile her feelings with the motivations that had initially driven her? As the night deepened, Emily's eyelids grew heavy, lulled by the sound of Harold's heartbeat and the gentle rhythm of the ocean outside. Just before she succumbed to sleep, a sudden thought pierced through her drowsiness. What if Harold's feelings were tied to more than just companionship? What if he, too, was struggling with the idea of love at their respective ages? The following morning, the sun streamed through the windows, and Emily awoke to the smell of coffee brewing. She stretched lazily before making her way to the kitchen, where Harold was pouring 2 steaming cups. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he greeted her with a smile. "I hope you're hungry. I made breakfast." The sight of him in an apron, looking both charming and domestic, made Emily's heart swell. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, a playful smile dancing on her lips. "I wanted to," he replied, handing her a cup. "I want to make this weekend special." As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily, laughter punctuating their words. Yet beneath the surface, Emily felt a tension building within her. They hadn't yet addressed the elephant in the room, the potential consequences of their relationship. "Harold," she began hesitantly, "there's something I need to talk to you about." "Is it about last night?" he asked, his brow furrowing slightly. "No, not just that. I mean, what happens next?" He set down his fork, his gaze steady. "What do you mean?" "I mean, where do we go from here? Are we just going to ignore the age difference and the circumstances that brought us together?" Harold sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I won't pretend that it's easy, but I believe in what we have. I don't want to rush into anything, but I also don't want to shy away from it." Emily's heart raced. "But what about your family? What would they think?" "They'll have their opinions, as families often do," he said, his voice firm. "But ultimately, it's my life, and I want to live it with you, if that's what you want." The sincerity in his words sent a shiver down her spine, but before she could respond, a sudden knock at the door interrupted their moment. "Who could that be?" Harold said, glancing toward the door with an expression of confusion. Emily's heart dropped as a sense of foreboding washed over her. She had a strange feeling that whatever was behind that door could change everything. As Emily sat on the edge of her bed, the letter trembled in her hands, the weight of its contents pressing down on her like a brick. The elegant script, the embossed seal at the top, it all felt like a punch to the gut. She read it again, her heart racing, hoping against hope that she had misinterpreted the words. But no, the message was clear. Harold's wealth would be passed on only to his children, not to a partner. A mix of relief and disappointment washed over her, creating a turbulent wave of emotions that crashed against the shore of her heart. Was this all for nothing? She whispered to herself, the silence of the room enveloping her like a thick fog. She had convinced herself that her feelings for Harold had grown into something genuine, yet this letter threatened to unravel everything. It was a cruel twist of fate, one that left her questioning her motives and desires. She felt like a pawn in a game far more complex than she had anticipated. With a deep breath, she pulled herself up and paced the small space of her apartment, her thoughts racing. The realization that her initial intentions were now overshadowed by genuine affection for Harold complicated everything. She thought back to their time together, the laughter they shared, the stories he told, the way he looked at her with a warmth that made her heart flutter. But now, all of that seemed tainted by the shadow of her original plan. After what felt like an eternity of pacing, she decided she needed to confront Harold. He deserved to know about the letter, but more than that, she needed clarity. She slipped into a jacket, grabbed her keys, and headed out, her heart pounding in rhythm with her footsteps. When she arrived at Harold's lavish home, the familiar sight of the sprawling estate felt different. The grandeur that once seemed enchanting now felt like a gilded cage. She knocked on the door, her heart racing with anticipation. Harold answered, surprise dancing across his features. "Emily, what a nice surprise," he said, his voice warm yet tinged with curiosity. "Harold, we need to talk," she replied. her tone more serious than she intended. "Of course, come in," he gestured, stepping aside to let her in. The air inside was rich with the scent of aged wood and the faint aroma of his favorite cologne. She followed him into the living room, where the sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a golden glow over the plush furniture. "Is everything okay?" Harold asked, concern etching lines on his forehead as he settled into a chair. Emily took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I received a letter from your lawyer," she began, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions. "It said that your wealth will only go to your children, not to a partner." Harold's expression shifted from warmth to apprehension. "I see," he replied slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I didn't want to burden you with the details, but yes, that is correct." "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I mean, we've been together for months, and I thought we were building something real." "Emily, you have to understand," he said, leaning forward, his voice earnest. "My children have been through so much. I didn't want to complicate things further. They have to come first." "And what about me? What about us?" She shot back, her heart racing. "Am I just an afterthought?" "No, of course not," Harold replied, his voice firm yet gentle. "You mean a lot to me. But my family's feelings are complicated. I can't just disregard their concerns." Emily's chest tightened at his words. "So what does that mean for us? If things don't change, where do I fit into your life?" "Emily, I care for you deeply," he said, his tone softening. "But I can't simply disregard my children's feelings. I need to be cautious." "Cautious?" she echoed, incredulous. "You're saying that as if it's a choice I have to accept. I'm not asking to be a part of your family's fortune. I just want to know where I stand with you." Harold sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to ease a headache. "You stand with me, but I need to protect my family. I can't let them think I'm replacing their mother. They've already lost so much." "Maybe it's not about replacing anyone," Emily fired back, her frustration boiling over. "Maybe it's about moving forward. We could build something together, but you're holding back." "Emily, please," he pleaded. "I'm doing my best to navigate these waters. It's not easy for me either." "Then why don't you let me in?" she challenged, her voice rising. "Why do I feel like I'm always on the outside looking in?" The silence that followed felt heavy, as if the air had thickened with unspoken words. Emily's heart raced, and she realized that the tension between them had reached a boiling point. Harold looked away, his expression one of deep contemplation. "Because I'm scared," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of losing you, scared of what my children will think. I don't want to hurt anyone." "Maybe you're hurting me by not being honest," Emily said, her voice softer now, tinged with vulnerability. "I need to know that I matter to you, beyond just being your girlfriend." "You do matter, Emily," Harold insisted, his eyes locking onto hers. "You mean more to me than you realize. But I can't just turn my back on my family." With frustration boiling in her chest, Emily stood up abruptly. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "If you can't be honest with me, what's the point of all this?" "Emily, wait!" Harold called out, but she was already moving toward the door, her heart pounding in her ears. She felt a mix of anger and sadness as she stepped outside, the cool air hitting her like a wave. "Maybe I was foolish to think I could be a part of your life," she muttered under her breath, her mind racing. The walk back to her apartment felt like a blur, the world around her fading into the background. As she entered her cramped space, she leaned against the door, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The confrontation had left her feeling lost and confused, and the weight of her original intentions hung heavily in the air. Was it all just a game? She asked herself, tears welling in her eyes. She had wanted security, but now it felt like she was losing something far more valuable, the chance at a real connection. The battle between her heart and her ambitions had reached a fever pitch, leaving her questioning everything she thought she wanted. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, the soft light of the afternoon sun streaming through the window, casting a warm glow over her cluttered room. The remnants of her argument with Harold echoed in her mind, each word replaying like a broken record. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over Harold's contact, but she couldn't bring herself to press call. Instead, she stared blankly at the wall, lost in thought. What had started as a calculated endeavor had morphed into something she could hardly recognize. When she first met Harold, she had been drawn to his wealth and what it could offer her, a sense of security, a way out of her financial struggles. But now, those motivations felt distant and tarnished. She remembered the warmth of his laughter, the kindness in his gaze, and the stories he shared that painted a picture of a life fully lived. With each passing day, her heart had slowly chipped away at the walls she had built, and now she found herself questioning everything. "Am I in this for the right reasons?" she whispered to herself, the question lingering in the air like an uninvited guest. She thought of Harold's family, their skepticism, the way they looked at her as if she were nothing more than a gold digger. It hurt. She had wanted to prove them wrong, to show them that her feelings were genuine, that she wasn't just after his money. But the nagging doubt clawed at her insides. In a moment of clarity, she reached for her journal and began to write. "I need to figure out what I want. Do I love him, or do I love what he represents?" The ink flowed from her pen as she poured out her confusion, her fears, and ultimately her desires. She wrote about the moments they shared, from quiet evenings spent talking about their dreams to passionate kisses that ignited something deep within her. As she filled the pages, she realized that her feelings had become tangled with her ambitions, creating a web she wasn't sure she could untangle. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. She glanced at the screen, her heart sinking when she saw Harold's doctor's name flashing on it. A sense of dread washed over her. With trembling hands, she answered the call, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello?" "Emily, it's Dr. Thompson. I need to speak with you about Harold," the doctor said, his voice steady yet somber. Emily's mind raced. Had something happened? Was Harold okay? "It's important that you come to the hospital as soon as possible." Is he all right?" she stammered, a cold sweat breaking out across her brow. "Please, just come. I'll explain everything when you arrive," Dr. Thompson replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Panic surged through her as she hung up the phone. She rushed to grab her coat, her heart pounding in her chest. In those few moments, she felt a mixture of fear and urgency. The thought of losing Harold sent her mind spiraling. She had never truly contemplated that possibility. The man she had begun to care for, no, love, might be slipping away. When she arrived at the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic hit her like a brick wall. She raced through the halls, her heart in her throat, until she found Dr. Thompson standing outside Harold's room. His expression was grave and Emily's stomach dropped. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Emily, I'm afraid I have some difficult news," Dr. Thompson said, leading her into the room. "Harold has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. He has only a few months left." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she took in Harold's frail form, lying in the hospital bed, his once vibrant face now pale and drawn. "No, no, this can't be happening," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Emily," Harold said weakly, his eyes lighting up as he saw her. "You're here." He reached out for her hand, and she took it, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, a stark contrast to the chill in the room. "I'm here, Harold. I'm right here," she said, her voice trembling. She sat beside him, her heart breaking as she brushed his hair back, trying to hold back the tears. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "It's not your fault, my dear," he replied, his voice soft but steady. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want you to feel obligated to stay." "Obligated?" she echoed, her voice rising. "How could you think that? Harold, I care about you. I don't want to lose you." He smiled gently, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "In my old age, I've learned that life is fragile. I wanted to make sure you were with me for the right reasons, not out of pity or obligation." Emily felt her heart twist in her chest. "I thought maybe I could help you through this. I know I started this for selfish reasons, but it became so much more. I didn't realize how much I would care for you, Harold. You mean so much to me." "Do you really love me, Emily?" he asked, studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse race. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. I love you. His expression softened, and for a moment, they were both lost in the weight of those words. But then something shifted. I have something to tell you, Harold said, his voice barely above a whisper, but there was a heaviness in his tone that made her heart race. I planned to leave everything to you in my will, but only if I knew you truly loved me. I didn't want to just be a means to an end. Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks as she processed his revelation. The implications of his words hit her like a tidal wave. Harold, I was selfish. I thought I could secure my future with you, but I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this to be about money. I know that now, he said, squeezing her hand, but I need you to promise me something. If you're going to stay, stay for the right reasons. Stay because you want to be here with me, not because of what you could gain. Emily nodded, but her mind was a whirlwind. She had approached this relationship with an agenda, and now, faced with the reality of his illness, everything felt different. She realized that the prospect of losing him was more terrifying than the thought of a life without his wealth. I promise, Harold, I want to be here with you. As they sat together, the weight of his impending departure lingered in the air, mingling with the unspoken truce between them. In that moment, Emily understood that love was not about age or financial security. It was about connection, vulnerability, and the raw, beautiful messiness of being human. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing. She would fight for Harold, for their love, and confront whatever challenges lay ahead.